Hello and welcome back to That Old Shop. My name is Mike Scott. Today I'm going to be working on this winch here. I had bought this several years ago. It was just a rusty pig. I cleaned it up, replaced some parts, got into the motor here, make sure that ran. It does run. This is basically just a starter motor. But this is a Ramsey winch. This is made in Oklahoma, actually. This fair lead, this is what guides the cable in and out of the winch. This fair lead gets bolted onto this frame. This frame gets mounted onto your trailer, your truck, your tow truck, whatever. This was all rusty, of course. I had taken this off and took these rollers out of there. They were pretty chewed up. They weren't spinning. I turned them on my lathe over there, cleaned them up as best I could. The frame of it and these two side rollers do not spin. I tried to get them to spin and then I realized they were just guides for if the cable was ever to be off to the side, that it would just give it something for the cable to ride against that wouldn't chew up the strands of the cable. So I still got to shoot some grease in there. But the frame of it, what I was starting to say was the frame of it, I did this process I did on one of my bench vices, which was get it all cleaned up, and I put it in a grill, like a barbecue grill, and got it warmed up. And kept putting vegetable oil on it, vegetable shortening I should say, the greasy stuff, and that's what helps to preserve it from getting rusted. So the movable rollers didn't get that treatment, but the frame and these two side guide bars, we'll call them, they got the treatment. So that's hasn't been rusting sitting here on the bench. This, where the cable goes around, this is called the cap stand. This has actually been getting some surface rust just sitting here in my shop, so that's kind of shows you right there the treatment I did on this piece. The treatment that I did do on the fair lead frame has kept it from getting any surface rust on it in the shop anyway. I had this all apart. I did a separate video on this. You can look up on my past videos and see that video when it's all apart. We are going to tear it apart some, not as much as that video was. Get the winch out of the frame. This frame holds the pieces of the winch together, actually. So we'll get this cover out of the way here. This is where the electrical is in here. This has actually got a brake system in here. It's got a couple of solenoids, one forward, one reverse. Got this that actually mounts in the side of the black plastic cover I took off, and that's where the wired remote attaches to. It didn't come with the wired remote. I had to buy this separately. I got it off of eBay or someplace. It's used, but it plugs right in there, so that'll be nice. I also bought a cheap, somebody recommended one of these when I posted this project years ago. When I started on this project, he suggested getting one of these wireless remotes, and it's got this module that has to be wired in. I haven't figured that out yet. This frame is just held on by these large flatheads. Large flathead screws like this, and they have these conical type lock washers. Of course, I had to buy a whole box of them. That's what they look like. And they go right under the head of those flathead screws, which is just a slotted screw. I use this wrench because it's what I have laying here. So some flatheads go in this side where the fair lead mounts, and then just some regular hex heads go in this side. But you'll see how this comes apart. took this part out. But you can see that the hoist is, all the pieces, the main pieces, are held together in that frame. Once you take that frame off, then you start to come apart. As you can see, I have this numbered up from the previous time I was in there, all these wires, so I knew where they would go. This is a DC winch. It runs off a battery. I use a trolling motor battery, which I have in my Big Joe there. I'll get that wired into the tow vehicle, so it always charges the battery, and it'll run off of a battery that I have in the engine compartment of the tow vehicle, a second battery. But until I get to that point, I'm just gonna take my battery out of my Big Joe. Once I don't need that anymore in the old shop, and I'll just temporarily have that boxed in on my trailer to run this winch, so I can pull the larger machines on. And I have a couple of Ford tractors I need to pull on and get those moved. So I do have everything numbered. I had to verify that the numbers were still on. They didn't dry up and blow away. Okay, so there's three main leads. The starter motor, the winch motor we'll call it. What do you say, Megan? Gonna help me? Gonna help me? Gonna help me figure this winch out? How about you, Bella? You gonna help me too? You both are gonna help me, huh? You both are gonna help me? Yeah? You're just gonna be silly in here, huh? Okay, so there's just this plate here with the electricals on here, and the braking system is just held on to the unit with just 3/4 20s. And there's a whole bunch of 1/4 20 hex heads that hold this plate on. And you call it like an inspection plate over the whole gearbox. Hey, hold it down over there. Trying to do a video here. Bella. Okay, so that comes off after taking out those three of those, and then there's a whole bunch of 1/4 20s. I gotta get this braking deal off of here. Okay, this braking deal is just held on with a spring pin. A long spring pin is all of us holding that together. Let's see how many there are here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I think it's time for the cordless. Okay, now we're cooking with goose grease. Now it's a matter of prying this plate off of here. I believe there's just these two dowel pins on here. It looks like there's another hole for one there possibly, and maybe down there. We shall see. This did have a paper kind of gasket on there, but of course it was trashed by the time I got it off before, because it was so narrow and it has all these holes in it. So I just used the forma gasket. So I'm gonna have to get into here and see where possibly some washers would be needed to separate the gears. The gear set looks like there's a little spacer on there. You can go up against that. There's a washer there. There's a washer there. And this big one here looks like that would press up against there. I can see on the other side of this gear there is a spacer there and a bronze washer up there. This is the lever that you turn to either free spool the cable out or engage it so the winch will power feed in and or power feed out, depending on which button you press on the remote. Okay, some more deja vu memory stuff is coming back to me. Now I think I had this drill press vise on here to help hold this gearbox upright. There's all this weight from the capstan hanging off over there. Okay, so I brought this shaft and this gear out, and I saw that the hub of the gear, the boss around the center of the gear, presses up, does make contact with a bronze bushing, an oil-light bushing that I had replaced when I had this all apart. And that pressing up against that oil-light bronze, it keeps this large gear from making contact with the gear behind it, which was my concern. As far as I can tell, there's nothing else that's needed in here because there's no gear-to-gear contact that I was concerned about going to be taking place. Okay, after some investigating there, I verified that there's about 1,000 clearance between the sides of these gears, which I would think there'd be at least 5, but and you don't know the history on something this old, but when I did take it apart initially, there wasn't a lot of metal, wasn't really any metal, it was very clean inside. So I'm going to go with that amount of clearance. And with the gear oil, this actually uses a gear oil in here, in this gearbox. Very thick oil, so it travels up these gears and lubricates everything, not only in between the teeth, with a teeth mesh, but side to side. And it's not a differential, it's not something that's going down the road at 70 miles an hour, it's a winch. So it's not turning for very long and not turning for extended periods of time, and there's not a heat factor, at least in the gears of operating the winch. There's a heat factor in the motor. You can't run the motor continuously. So I'm going to clean this up, get it put back together, and get it wired up for you, show you how it works. We're going to be using this gear oil gasket maker. It's supposed to be able to stand up to the gear oil formulations. That's why I put on it before. Here's the old tube, it's still pliable. I think I may use this, I may break open a new one, I don't know. I'll get this cleaned up and start to assemble it. You put it on and you assemble the parts lightly. You just run them up there, all those screws. Don't crank them down is what I'm trying to say right away. You give a chance for the silicone in the Permatex gasket maker to harden up some, to set up some. And I'll read the instructions on the package again, but I don't remember if it's 2 hours or 24 hours, but And then after that period, then you tighten up the screws, because that basically makes the gasket by you having it just run up against there lightly, not crank down all the way. That forms the gasket, and then you come back and you tighten it up later. And in fact, I'll read the instructions right now. Assemble parts immediately. Finger tighten bolt until material begins to squeeze out around the flange. Allow it to dry 1 hour. Then tighten to torque specifications. And it's 24 hours before you fill up with your lubrication. So 1 hour, then 24 hours. So that's what we're going to do. I do have some acetone that I keep in a spray bottle. See if it can work. I'll clean off all these surfaces just to get the oil off. I'm going to leave some of the old Permatex on there. As long as it's on there firmly, I'm looking at it like paint. If it's paint that's on there firmly, you know, I'm going to paint over top of it in some instances. And that's how I'm going to treat this. As long as what remaining Permatex that's on there is on there firmly, I'm going to just leave it on there. That looks pretty good. Going around all the screw holes, of course. That whining you hear, that of course is the dogs. They're German Shepherds and they have a tendency to be whiners. Especially for some reason the female. That's not a strike against females, but this particular female shepherd is a big whiner. And that's her kind of grumbling right now. She's wrestling with the male now. Getting back to the the female shepherd thing. We had a male shepherd that was just like Bella, the female here. How verbal she is. When they're kind of wrestling like that, that's how the male was. Very verbal. So it's not a gender thing with German Shepherd dogs anyway. It's a personality thing. My thumb along there. Just so I'm sure there's coverage. This way you can physically see if all the shiny spots of the flange or the edge of in this case the edge of the gearbox is all covered with some Permatex. Especially around the holes. Because if you don't have Permatex in between the oil and the screw hole, that's going to be a failure. It's going to leak fluid, whatever the fluid is, out through the screw hole. You don't want that. The screws are not a watertight deal. They're not a pipe thread, not a compression seal under the head. It's going to leak. So there's two sets of dowel pins. There's these real tiny, they might be 1/8 inch maybe. And then there's these larger ones, maybe 3/16. I don't think they're quite a quarter, maybe a quarter. So I've got it up against there, and really it's probably tight enough just with the hand pressure I put on there to get it to the stage where it's going to make a gasket, form a gasket as they say. So I'm going to run these bolts in there, just hand tight. I'll put a little 1/4 inch ratchet on there and tighten them up, you know, run them down to the plate the rest of the way. These are really long for this thin of a plate. This plate's probably 1/4 inch, and these things stick out. Oh, geez. Long way. That's the start of the thread. That's at least a 1/2 inch of thread, so that's 2 times the diameter. Okay, so a couple of these bolts I got to take back out because there's 3 bolts that hold this plate on with the solenoids. They got to use 3 of those holes. So that'll be, and I think this one. Okay, so these larger dowels are probably like 3/16. They actually help locate this plate that has the solenoids on there. And I took the 3 bolts out of there, relocated them. So I knew that I had the right amount of bolts here, that I didn't lose anything on the bench, because there's longer ones that go through the plate that holds the solenoid. So I left those empty at first, and then I decided to go and get 3 bolts, shorter ones. So while I'm forming my gasket here, I got even pressure all the way around, and I have all the bolt holes filled for that purpose. Okay, laying this whole winch down. This is the plate that I just put on with all the 1/4-20 bolts and the Permatex in there. The reason I have it laying down because underneath the capstan there's these 2 springs. They're in these holes, and these pieces of, I'll call it phenolic, since I don't really know what it is because Ramsey won't tell me. They don't support this old of a winch. That's why I can get that in there and lower this down in there. Then when I bring the camera up, I'll show you at the top end here, there's a certain position that this locking collar has to go on in order for this to hold pressure against there all the time. And this pressure needs to be applied against the capstan so that when you shift it from free spool back and forth, you'll have some pressure on there to make that function. I'm going to lube this up. You spring this hole. There. So up here I have the 2 keys in the slots. They're 1/4 inch keys, so they're pretty hefty. 2 keyways there. And then there's these dimples here that line up with this set screw hole. And inside this set screw hole goes that ball bearing there, that spring, and then the set screw backs that up. So, and it's got to be in the right location to work. Because if we have it out too far in this location, this is where this hole will line up with that dimple. This will allow this capstan to move too much. And those springs won't function, and those little pieces of phenolic will just fall out of there. So we got to have this all the way down to there. We'll get the ball in there, get the spring in there. Set screw. And I'm not putting any Loctite on there because it does tighten up it. Okay, now you can see these holes here, this flat area here. I'll back you up. In this flat area here, there's two bolt holes here, two bolt holes here, same thing on the other side. And that's where that black frame goes around and holds this all together. So that when you operate the lever, bring it over here. You operate the lever, this holds it all together, and it just moves that much. Well, after much struggling, I got this back together, and I mean struggling. Shift the lever in order to engage and disengage the capstan. There, now it's engaged. And flip the lever the other way, how it free spools. Now it has some grease points for this end, for the fork end, for the engaging end. This gearbox would be full of gear oil, and what I discovered with that was these mounting bolts were drilled all the way through the gearbox housing. So I had to put Permatex around those so it wouldn't leak. Once I fill it up with gear lube, it would leak out of there. So I was very disappointed to see that. Other than that, it's all together so far. I have to still lay it down on the bench like it was at the beginning here. Now that I verified what the gearbox condition was, and get this plate mounted back on there with the two solenoids. When I had it all apart years ago, and I did the other video, I put power to the motor, and it spun with one of the gears pulled out. I have never actually ran it with it all together because it was in such a rusty condition. It wasn't going to be able to move. I would have burned the motor up trying. So I'm looking forward to the day, which will probably be tomorrow for me. Won't seem like tomorrow for you guys because it'll be right away. To see this under power and actually the capstan spinning. I do have the cable for it. I have it wrapped around. I soaked it. I stretched it out. Years ago I stretched it out and I forgot how many feet it is. It's really long. You could probably pull a car out of the river with how long the cable was. But I have the cable. I stretched it out years ago and soaked it with some gear lube and wrapped it around the outside of a garbage can, one of those heavy-duty Brute Rubbermaid garbage cans, and it's been on there for years now. I have it sitting outside, but it's undercover. So, be anxious to get it, like I said, wire it up and get this caps in, make sure the lever functions the way it's supposed to, and then get the cable wrapped around there. And then, of course, if that all pans out, to get it mounted on my trailer. That's the end goal here, is to get it mounted on the trailer and put it into use, doing what it's supposed to be doing, pulling stuff. So I'm going to lay this back down, put this plate back on there, and maybe I'll still wire it up tonight and just run it without any gear oil in there yet, because I have to wait 24 hours for the Permatex to set. I'll tighten up the bolt. It's been over an hour, I'm sure. Alright, so I'll get these 3 bolts taken out. Oh, gotta put this back on. That's gonna take that pin. Alright, got the roll pin in there. Okay, gonna tighten up all these bolts now. Some kind of same order. I should have done this before putting this frame back on, because some of these I can't get at with my ratchet. Yep, it's got a little squeeze on the Permatex. I can see it. It's just running the plate up there, running the bolts in there just snug. That's the word I was looking for earlier, and it escaped me. Run the bolts up there snug. Forms the thickness of the gasket out of the Permatex material. I'm waiting an hour, and then you tighten it up. Tighten it onto the gasket. And it needs a further cure time after that. The instructions say 24 hours, so that's what we'll do. Okay, how we get this plate put on with the longer bolts. Longer hex head cap screws. Oops, better put it on there right. So this is where those larger dowels come into play. They stick through the plate, through this gearbox plate with all the screws in it. Sticks through that plate to catch this plate to help guide it and get it on the right spot, because it has to be centered for this braking system here to work. I call it a braking system. I don't know if that's what it's really called. What the real guys call it. Yeah, I'll be anxious to put power to it with it all assembled. I may replace all these wires. The insulation feels kind of stiff. Half inch. But that's what we all say. Oh yeah, I'm gonna rebuild that thing. I gotta mount this in the cover first. I believe. Just like that, made in USA. Okay, I've got the socket or outlet mounted in the cover. I'm just going to wire up. Wires there. I don't know where I got these little copper washers, but they'll be perfect for this. Kind of a big washer. But it'll work. It'll work. It'll work. It'll work. Number 3. We've got a whole bunch of these wire number sets somebody was throwing out. I picked them out of the garbage and I have been using them for a long time now. Good enough for electrical connection. Let's see. Those are all good. Those are good. Ones I didn't mess with are good. Put some washers on there, I guess. Save the plastic. We got a cable. Had it marked up and everything, laying here on the bench. Got to go on here. The last one I put on. It's got to go on with that. There we go. Okay, let's put that down here. Yeah, I'm tired too, guys. Should we go in? Go to bed? Bella? Are you? Magnum? How about you? Ready to go to bed? Come on, let's go. Move. Here we are out another day, several days later. I did get some more work done on this. I got it wired up, got the battery wired up. So I got a couple of cables, new cables, much longer cables because it's going to go on my trailer. This is probably going to go right on the deck. I'm going to cut a hole in the deck, set this down in there, and the battery probably will be on the tongue of the trailer. The other problem I had was with the plug-in for the wired remote. I had to take this apart just to see, because it wouldn't run initially when I wired it up, so I had to start searching. And this control, let me get the other end. This Ramsey control I had bought online off of eBay or somewhere. It's used. I thought I'd better investigate that, so I took both ends apart, and make a long story a little shorter. There was a wire in here that was off, touching one of the other wires, so I had to work in that end after cleaning up that end. So I got that all back together. Let me plug her in here. Got it all back together, got a good ground. I ran the ground around the winch over there to the bolt that holds the fairlead onto the frame. So I figured that'd be a good solid ground. But it does work, does go both ways. Comes to a decent stop. Oh, that's something in this remote, I bet. All right, I tipped this plastic cover up where the other end of this wired remote is plugged into, so there must be something up with that end still. The screws in that end were pretty sketchy as far as, you know, they were kind of corroded, and you know, I had to work them back and forth to get them to loosen up and get the wire shoved in farther. So I'll have to take that back apart and investigate that. After I get that done, then I'm going to work at, and I'll show you guys a close-up of the wiring. So if one of you have a winch like this, and you can't find wiring diagrams, because I couldn't find the wiring diagram for this particular winch, I found a wiring diagram for a 2-solenoid DC winch. I didn't really go by that and check every little thing, because I found the problem right away with the wired remote connection. So, but I'll show you those connections. I'll get this wired in. This is a wireless remote. I'll get that wired in. Okay, so yeah, I had to take this connection apart here and clean up those. I just went over these and cleaned them up a lot better. But I'll give you the overview here of how it's wired up with a wired remote. I started to wire the wireless remote in there, and I thought that would be too confusing for you guys that aren't going to have that. So this is what the wiring looks like with just the wired remote. There's the battery, of course. Positive comes up to this terminal under here. On the bottom of this solenoid, so it'll be on the right side. Right there. The ground is just grounded to the frame where the fairlight is bolted to. I just took one of the mounting bolts loose that holds the fairlight on and got the ground down there. Now, as far as all these other wires here, this black one from this side of the solenoid goes up to here, this side of the winch motor. Going all the way over here to the other side, to the right side of this solenoid, this large black wire goes up to this side of the winch motor. And then that leaves this large wire here from the armature end of the winch motor, goes down to right here. As you're looking at it here, it goes right here. I got my number on there. And this is part of that braking system here. Okay. And then from the other terminal, there's a jumper wire that runs up to, doesn't go under there, it goes all the way up to right here. So a jumper wire, a thick black jumper wire, goes from this side of this solenoid down to here. That's it on the large black wires, and then you have these jumper plates or bands. I believe they're copper. One is bent from this terminal to this side of this solenoid. Then you have another one that goes from right there, and it's just a flat, straight bar runs to this terminal, to this solenoid. Then you've got another right angle bent one right here. That is it on the winch wiring without the wireless remote. Now I'll wire in and I'll show you that it works again. This controller, Ramsey brand. Okay, I'll get the wireless remote wired in there. I'll probably have to get the wires connected and maybe then mount that somehow inside this cover, so it's all covered up and mostly hidden away from the weather. These winches can't take water, so if you got one of these on your vehicle and you're jumping puddles, that ain't gonna work out. So I'll bring you back when I start to get this wired in there. Okay, with this wireless remote wired in here, got that in there correctly. So basically from this module here, down here, there's a yellow wire and a white, or basically there's two wires that go to the solenoid. So I imagine the in and out may be wired differently. I may just have to switch these two wires to get to go in and out. Let's see, we're on the fair lead side here. Yep, that would be out. That would be in, so that's correct then. Basically, there's two control wires. There's a power wire, the red one, and I just connected to the terminal where I got the power coming in from the battery. Then there's a black wire that is a ground wire. I just connected it to a mounting screw back in there. And then this blue wire is just an antenna. So I'm gonna zip tie these up so nothing gets stuck in these moving parts. There are some moving parts right here. You can see that. Not many wires to get in there. So I'll get that cleaned up and get this cover put back on and show you the finished product. There she is, boys and girls, all put back together, all wired up. I need to take the cover back off though to get the gear oil in the gearbox there. Other than that, she works. In and out with the wired remote, in and out with the wireless remote. This is kind of the orientation will be on the front of the trailer. Like I said, going to cut a hole in the deck, drop this down in there. Cables will run over there's a bumper on my car trailer on the front of it. And the battery I'm going to house in a battery box on the tongue of the trailer. I probably will at least get the wire that charges my trailer battery for the electric trailer brakes, run a wire from there up to this battery here to just as a trickle charger to top up, keep this battery topped off. See how that goes. But until then, there it is, the Ramsey DC9-1, 8,000 pound, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Okay, other than like I said, putting some gear oil in the gearbox and shooting some grease in these grease fittings for these rollers and for the lever for freewheeling and engaging it. I think we're done, boys and girls. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, comment if you like. Thanks. Bye.